Fellas, and the ladies.
Yeah, that's all you. That's
And the
all you.
ladies. Welcome back to another episode. We sitting down. Code, my main man,
Yes, sir.
mini goat, baby goat,
He said,
goat
bye.
of goats.
That's the Jarrell.
There he is.
Good, it was good.
That's the Jarrell special.
Yeah, he said, bye.
Bye.
That's
All right,
funny.
Code. I'm gonna be honest with you. I have no idea. I walked into this podcast thinking
Yeah.
that I have no idea what we're gonna talk about. So, you.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Something that I had on my mind that I think will be really interesting is I kind of want to pick your brain on the difference of what you do versus how you do something. And so I know that can be kind of broad,
Yeah,
for
unpack
sure.
that for me.
So basically, when it comes to training and being out on the floor, obviously we do things a little bit different, which we've covered in the past. From blending to, some prep work, and yeah, there's some differences, but in general, in my opinion too, I feel like some of the players that have seen the biggest jumps haven't even touched the whole spectrum when it comes to drills, progressions, regressions that we do yet, but they come in with a purpose and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it. And so, I guess where I wanted to go with this was, what do you think about when it comes to things? You could be doing something that may not be the most beneficial for you, maybe not the most specific for maybe your movement profile or what you need at that time. But if you're intentional with what you're doing,
The mindset.
yeah, and the mindset behind it, and how focused or how serious,
Intentional.
yeah, you take what you're doing, what you see when it comes to players and athletes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a lot, but
That's like, we'll unpack it piece by piece.
yeah.
So I think one of the big things is literally what you said is one of the things that I think with athletes that we do best. I think there's a lot of ways to develop athletes. And I think one thing that was something that I'm very intentional about, not only just, it has nothing to do even just with baseball, just like in general of like development, if it be leadership, if it be communication, if it be whatever those things, again, we talked a lot on the podcast about just certain areas of like, let's say if it's, maybe you're really struggling with, like, let's say it's your arm strength. Let's say it is, your a blind spot that you have. We've had podcast series about blind spots and things like that in your life as well. I think one of the big things that we may miss with it is more than anything is that it's the mindset behind how we do things and how we intentionally get better at something. So one thing I used to always ask to our hitters at 108 is, as I would progress, in the very beginning, I'm telling them, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go through it like this. I'm giving them like more of like basically coming in super green. We're going to go about training this way. Right. Then I started doing it like, okay. And then you think about it, the same thing in a classroom, right? Like you're specifically getting told, information. Then I started like testing them on information, right? I started asking them, like, okay, like, typically when you're struggling with this, what do we do? Right? Bigger question, right? Then you get to the other point of being like, then guys start coming in and I go, hey, what are you going to work on today? I'm not going to tell you what to work on today. Like, what are you working on today? And then now that's another level of like getting them to a deeper process of being like, okay, what do I need to work on? Right. Let alone rather than how am I actually going to work on it? Because that's my next question. Right. Then I go back to layer 2. Then I'm like, okay, but how are you going to make sure you get better at that today? Right? Like, what are drills you're going to do? What are constraints you're going to put yourself in? How are you going to measure it? How do you know if you're actually getting better at this? How are you going to set up your feedback? How are you going to do all these other things to make sure you're better at this by the time, again, not necessarily you need to be a superstar, obviously, by the time that you leave today, but that there's an intentional process about how you're going about whatever you want to get better at. Because, again, I think subjectively, we just all like, a lot of people, like, for example, we just talked about this earlier, like most players when they go, to hit in a batting cage or
Mm.
whatever. They walk in, they hit a couple balls off the tee, move the tee maybe around a little bit, maybe.
Mm.
A lot of guys don't even do that. Hit a ball right down the middle, boom, boom, pound a couple, go to front toss, boom, do 3 rounds, hit BP, go hit 3 rounds and try to hit doubles and whatever. And they call it a day and they go home and they're like, bam, okay, I got my work in today. I'm going to be JD Martinez here in 5 years. Like,
Yeah.
that's not how it's going to roll. For one. Two, again, like with it, if it does work for someone, they probably were already really that good. And also, too, like they can get away with things I never could. I wasn't athletic enough. I wasn't skilled enough. I wasn't, I didn't wake up in the morning. It wasn't God given for me in that area of my life. Wasn't, gifts that I had to be really gritty to like learn these things. So I think it developed in my head. So I think, again, getting back to that, I think one of the biggest things that we do for athletes more than anything, I mean, I always say like, look, we could be wrong with some information, but one thing that I think we really help athletes with is setting up a plan, right? And knowing how to train, and also a mindset around not only training, but again, developing period in your life and then taking that into your life as well. So, you could be wrong about what you're working on, right? Maybe you're working on something that isn't going to be isn't really where you should be focused on, right? And that's okay. Like again, we don't all have a crystal ball. Like, and also too, coaches are the same way. Like something I would have focused on with the hitter 5 years ago, probably might not be as close of what I'd focus on now if they're coming in. Like in the last couple of years, like I remember back when I was at 108, we didn't put a ton of emphasis. We knew crossbody stability, we knew a lot of those other things, but like pelvic stability just wasn't. I just wasn't a big deal. Like I saw everything more as like a coordination, CNS, fascial slings, like those things as well. But like now again, like getting deeper and deeper into like, like pelvic stability, for example, is just like in general, like we lack a ton of pelvic stability as baseball players. And that's something that, again, I realize now every time we go to do something, again, and Randy Sullivan's been saying this for years, right? There's like the pelvis is the center of the universe, right? Like, and it should be your center of the universe, is understanding like what your pelvis is doing. And like, if you don't have control over that, and also too, you don't have stability, it's going to cause a lot of problems. It's going to show up in a lot of different areas, and throughout everything else. So I think like, in base from that higher level perspective is like when we get results with guys is really teaching them a process and how they're going about intentionally making sure they're getting better at something today. They're not just following orders. They're not just answering a test. And then we don't just stop there. It's continuing progressing. And that's where I think when guys stay with us long term, they'd start to see the full fold out of all of that and see, then they look back and they go, wow, I understand why we were doing that my first couple weeks. And at the time, I didn't know how brilliant that was. I didn't understand the expertise behind it, the thought process behind all of that. I just walked into it like, blind, right? And, now I can look back and be grateful. And I think we can connect with this in the sense of like, okay, when you were a child, right? Like when you were a kid, your parents are taking care of you, right? They're providing things for you. They're paying for your food. They're, you're paying for your tournaments. They're showing up to your games. Your dad just worked, I remember thinking about this all the time. My dad just worked, freaking 12 hours, on his hands and knees, setting tile X, Y, and Z. And he comes home and he's playing catch with me outside. Like at the time, I'm thinking, Dad, can you come play catch with me? I'm not understanding what all is going into that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big piece. I think that that's a big piece is that for them, as for a hitter, is when they get towards, let's say they've been training with us for a year, let's say they've been training with us for a couple years, and then you look back and you go, man, like I understand why all that prep was so important. I understand why we were doing all those other things because I was having some real issues here. And especially, I think the last layer that I didn't talk about a minute ago, the last layer is then I start asking them about other hitters, right? Because that's another step. Right? Then when you can start to see other players and how they're moving, and then you start developing a plan for them, now that takes your game plan to a whole nother level. I can now program for myself so much better because I've programmed for hundreds of athletes, thousands of athletes I've created programs for. So now when I go to program for myself and when I understand the swing from a whole nother perspective, that I think is big. So I think from like a high level overview with it is I think that that's a big piece of why we can really help with guys.
Yeah, and a couple points I wanted to point out was we're starting to get to the point where it's some kids' first week, first month, and we have some kids that it's their 6th, 7th month. They've been training for a while, and like you said, they understand the importance of why we were doing what we were doing at the beginning. Some of them, we start with some basic principles when it comes to prep work and drills, and they're not necessarily doing the same thing that the guys that have been here for 6 months are doing, right? But the people that are here for maybe it's their second, third week, they're like, "Hey, can I do this?" And it's funny because you'll actually hear some of the guys like, "No, no, 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 slow down. Like, I promise, if you try to do this now, like it's not gonna work. Like you're going to mess up the foundation that they're trying to build." Like, heard a couple kids actually like, "Yeah, dude, I probably didn't even progress past whatever lunge swings to feet together step backs for a month, you know."
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
it's interesting seeing players start to realize that, like you were saying, that process that they're starting to go through mentally, and then too for them to realize, okay, they've been here for 6 months. Maybe we weren't doing just lunge swings. Maybe we were doing the progression of feet together, step back to lunge, or maybe a slight variation, right? With turners can be another one. And then they ask, hey, can we start with lunge swings? And they go, I just want to get a feel back for that drill, and they'll take 5-10 swings. And so that's really interesting when they start to realize that too. And then another thing I wanted to point out was sometimes, in my opinion too, what I've seen is mostly with the Zooms, actually, when it goes to remote programming to Zooms, and I see the process that, okay, I program for them, and then I see how they're doing it live with real feedback, like right in that time. And it's the players almost want this completely different drill that's going to get something
Mm-hmm.
to work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be, hey, let's do the same drill. Let's just add a hurdle right in
Different
front of your front
intention.
leg,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then explain, okay, this is the why behind it. And
Yeah.
then it's just like a lot of things clean up really quickly,
For sure.
and just a matter of putting in a little implement there
Mm-hmm.
for 5 swings, and
Yeah.
then they take the implement out. And it's like, okay, now I feel what you were trying to,
Yeah.
get me to feel. But it's not this, okay, let's do 10 different drills than we were doing last month.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just add another implement.
Yeah, I was gonna say you literally brought up a point that Lance Wheeler makes all the time. Is he talks about like you could take the same drill but with a different intention with the same drill, and it's now 10 different drills, and it's the same exact drill. It's just with a different intention. And so, like for example, like again, like when we do something with a hurdle, like let's say we're doing like an open 45 with a hurdle on the front knee, right? Well, we could have one where we're like, hey, the guy's pushing, and the intention is don't touch it. Then we can do another guy and he's turning away, and we say, hey, make sure the knee stays on the hurdle the entire time.
Yeah.
And it's the same hurdle, the same drill, but completely different intentions with different things we're trying to get. So like one, why would we want, and I'll explain that, like why would we want the knee not to touch the hurdle in like an open 45, or maybe just even a from launch swing, right? If I'm getting to my launch position, I'm going to fire. Well, I don't want the push forward out of my backside, right? Or I can't resist with my front leg, and I'm trying to build up some stability on the front side of not letting my body drift forward. So the intention would be don't touch the hurdle. For another guy, when we're asking them to obviously put a hurdle in front of them, and I'm trying to get their knee to stay on the hurdle the entire time as they're stretching their pelvis away, is what I might be trying to do is build up strength and external rotation with their front hip. And so now with it, because they're actually just like when you have a band around your knees, right? Like it gives you feedback as I'm turning my pelvis away, my knee wants to come off the hurdle. It doesn't want to be an external rotation. I know he has issues with that. So now that same drill, same constraint can be very different from it could be the same exact hitter, just we're working on different things at different times. And again, that's where it can get confusing. But at the same time, I also think is like the art there of like coaching and understanding constraints and how to use them. And then the art of coaching in the sense of everybody thinks you just set up a constraint. Well, yeah, I set up the constraint, but then I also have to give the cues on what I'm looking for. And so, for example, again, I set up that constraint, and then I'm like, hey, I don't want you to push, or hey, I want you to do this. I changed the intention, and that's what is Lance Wheeler's talking about when he's like, I'm changing the intention. If I change the intention of the drill, you're going to get something very different from it, just because I changed your intention. And that's where we mix up intent with intention, right? Intent is like, I'm going to swing as hard as I can, or, I'm going to do this run and gun as fast as okay, that's, again, we see that a lot on like absolute force, but intent really comes from the root of intention, and what is my intention with this drill or with this constraint.
Yeah, and I think an example is actually Hub here hitting is a perfect example is we'll talk about being able to rotate into the front side and maybe being able to resist rotation with that front side, but also to why video can be so important and why
Yeah.
spoke with you and like had some of the kids recording some of the other
Yep.
kids.
Yeah. That was big. That was
Yeah,
big back in the day.
yeah, which is big for them to see what we're talking about.
Explain what we talked about with that, because I think that could help a lot of people. That
Which part?
process of like actually having them record and
Yeah,
working in groups.
so context, we have groups of 3 in the cage at the time, and perfect world, we'll get some of them tossed into the other kids. You see it with the older kids more often. Some of the younger kids can't toss, but having one of the kids actually have the iPad and record the kid that's hitting, right? And so then the kid that was just hitting then can either later on before their next session, during the cage session, when after they're picking up balls or taking a break, whatever, they can go back and look at what they're looking for, or I can use it as a teaching point, like, hey, here's the cue I gave you. You may feel like you're doing this, but watch the video. Are you doing it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see what
Very
you're
often
talking
wrong.
about.
Yeah, it's
Right. And they start to connect the dots with their eyes, what they're looking
Yep.
for, which then allows them to, when they're not here,
Mm.
which what I notice is when they're not here, and I start getting videos from them, they're like, hey, see, like, I'm working on what we were talking about, and they can start to see it and for themselves.
Yeah.
So again, like you were saying, in their process of maturity, like they don't need their hands held.
Yeah.
When they go and they hit on their own.
Yeah. I think the big thing there too, one thing that it can get missed as well, is it keeps the next hitter engaged. So, because you're sitting there videoing the guy in front of you, right? Like, so you're engaged with his swings. You're actually watching him swing, and then you're hearing coaching. Where again, obviously, if I'm just sitting off to the side of the cage and that guy's hitting, I'm kind of in la la land, doing whatever. I could be drifting, but because I'm sitting there and I have to record him, it like remains that it keeps me intentional about what's going on. And there's a lot of moments you can learn so much from watching somebody else get coached. Again, for example, like again, hitting coaches, like when we learn the most, like we shadow, like we shadow other hitting coaches. Same thing, like too, like you learn from me. Same thing as like I did that with Eugene. I did that with, Donnie Ecker. I did that with Mike Easler. I did that with so many different hitting coaches throughout my life, is watching hitting coaches. I still do.
Yeah.
I'll sit there and watch a hitting coach work with a hitter, and I'll see what he's trying to do, what he's trying to get him to do. I'll watch the entire process. Maybe that one drill, I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, or blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, it gets to the end of the process. I'm like, oh. And then also maybe I need to ask him a question of why he wanted to go that route and what he was trying to see. Because again, like, look, we try to drill with somebody, maybe it doesn't work. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I tried to go to this because I thought this would work and it didn't. So I moved on, right? And then we went to somewhere else and then that worked. And then we went a different direction. Or, this is why I do it this way, because it helps them understand X, Y, Z, and then I proceed forward, right? All those things are great. And also, too, sometimes I'm like, I don't know where he's going with this. It's like watching someone paint. You ever seen those, like, TikTok? Like, they'll be, like, painting something, and you're like, what are they trying to paint? And then all of a sudden, at the end, it's like, whoa,
Boom.
like, how did that happen, right? Like, they had that vision in their head the whole time, And so I think it's the same thing, too. It's like you're an artist. As a coach, I see it as, like, you're an artist. Like, I see the hitter, and I come up with a plan, right? Just like I'm doing a painting, right? I see an image, right? And I'm like, okay, I come up with a way of how I'm going to create that painting and how I'm going to get there. And then also, too, I have a plan. But again, the plan is everything. The plan is nothing, right? One of my favorites. Plan is everything. Plan is nothing. You start getting into it and you're like, oh, actually, that wasn't the best way. Or they were not responding very well to that. Or they're failing too much. Or they're being too successful and we need to progress quicker. Or I don't have the right equipment. Or I have 3 people in the room and this would work with one person, but not 3. Or he's got a game tomorrow. And my plan was to develop him over the next 3 months. But like, he's going to come in for 3 days and then leave. And then he's got a big tournament after this week. And so I have to adjust. And so like, these are all things that you have to take in. Because again, if you don't, I would say like, too, if you don't have time, you can't take Humpty Dumpty apart if you don't have time to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? Like he's got to go into a game, he's got to play today. And then you got to take in the difference in athletes. Some athletes can go into a game and struggle and be cool, not a big problem. They don't care. It's like summer league or whatever. And whatever that is, like they don't care. And then you could even be games that matter. And they're like, hey, I'm a freshman. I don't really care. I'm waiting, if I struggle for 3 weeks, that's fine. Like I got plenty of time and it's all good. So I think those are all things that, you taking into consideration is, how it goes and all the context of understanding when I can push one way or when I can push another.
Yeah. And I think this is a kind of lead into another topic of everything that you touched on is the art of then running a room too. And so all the pieces that we just talked about of, okay, what are we doing? How are we doing it? We have 3
people. Before you
people.
go into that, I want you to touch on that because what did you think about, or did you even think about Like, how much have you learned about the art of running a room
Uh,
from when you first came in to like? Because again, remote sessions are very different.
very, very.
So what do you mean when you say like art of running a room? Talk about the value from what you thought compared to what you've learned now from actually having to run a room.
Yeah, so I think too is I had the perspective that I had as a player where um maybe I was different, maybe, I'm more similar than than I think. But if I went into a situation, whether it be showed up to practice early, I showed up to a facility, newer, I'm used to it, a gym, whatever, I wasn't ever just going to sit around. I always found something to do, whether someone told me to or not. But a lot of people, especially since we're kind of early on and, it's what, 6 months in, some of them need that guidance of, okay, this is what I need to be doing at this point in time. And also to, this is what I need to work on. And I've been given the tools to work on it. And so I think the difference between like Zooms and remote is you're with them every step of the way. And when it comes to running a room, you have 3 people in a cage at the same time. You also have people coming in for the next session that you're prepping to get into the cage. And so for me, I assumed that if there was stuff on the board that people would do it. And also too that, okay, I'm struggling with X. I can either ask a question of, okay, how can I work on this? Is there prep? Is there like, I know it's patterning stuff, but maybe it's something I don't do in the cage. Maybe it's PVC pipe swings. Maybe it's slap shots. Maybe there's something like hacky sack, like we brought up, something little like that, where I think I just assumed that, again, some of those things would start to happen as they kept coming.
Yeah, I'll say it's the number one thing that coaches do when they get into coaching from playing is they assume that players are going to play like them.
For sure.
Right. Which again, they're going to learn like them. They want to be coached like them. They want to do all those other things. And you realize real quickly. And that's what I talk to people about all the time is like, really good coach. It's like, first off, like, I think 99% of coaches shouldn't be coaching people to do what you did when you played. Not saying like it might, maybe some mindset stuff was good, some other things, but there's a reason, probably for some pretty large reasons why you had to hang up your cleats and you weren't good enough. Right. Like you learned a lot of things after you got done playing. And so I say that to people all the time. It's like, okay, I don't teach from experience of while I played. Like, yeah, I have some of that. Like there's pieces, I would say probably like maybe 15% for me. I teach very opposite of how I played.
Yeah.
But again, other people, maybe it's a little higher. Maybe it's 30%. Maybe you're a big leaguer and these things work for you. But even then, right? Like, okay, that's only one way of doing things that worked for you. Like, awesome, right? When you start realizing real quickly is like, again, everybody learns in different ways. They need to be talked to in different ways with different tones at different times. Other athletes you can criticize a little bit more. Other ones you need to pat on the butt a little bit more. There's the mix, everything in between. Also contextual situations, certain situations. Hey man, this guy's been going through a lot in his life. And, again, like right now and he's struggling and he's a senior and he's trying to get signed right now. And like, I can't be as critical with him and all these other things. And then there's other guys where it's like, yo, like he's kind of, on this little arrogant kick right now. And like, I gotta shut him down, and I gotta let him know that like, he's not that good.
Yeah.
And there's ways of doing that artfully without, being a dick. Like, there's ways of doing that. With players that, for example, like I said, you can have them put them in environments where they're going to struggle so that they can gain awareness. And if you can help them gain awareness, they're going to see things like how you're going to see them like, hey, like, because again, like, I don't want you to fail, right? Like, I want you to succeed, which is why I'm going to put you in. I want you to fail in here, right? Like, you fail in here, right? You struggle in here so that you could, be a man and be a dude out there. Like, great, like, awesome. But again, like that's something that can get lost. Again, a lot of people as they make that transition is like they just try to coach everybody like like it's them.
Yeah, and I think that's where too my personality obviously don't try to be anything other than myself. But I look back at former coaches that I've played under when it comes to practice plans and like how the flow was when it came to our hitting portion of our practice, and then obviously like when you come in and like some of the things that you instigate and have people start doing, or you see
I like
stuff
the word
on social
instigate.
how, but kind of like spark it, like
Yeah.
you don't come in and just like as a little praise to you. So you don't just come in and just take over the show and be like,
Yeah,
oh
super
yeah,
coach.
you're not doing this the way that I would do it, so I'm just gonna take over.
Yeah.
You kind of nudge, or wink,
Yeah,
wink.
a lot of times too. Like I'll try to. I'll usually like watch them doing a drill that they're already doing,
Mm.
and then give them a cue on a drill like you already have them doing.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do, and then maybe if it's not working, then maybe we switch up a drill or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, or you and I talk. But yeah, like you said, like again, you coming in and being like, okay, we're gonna do all these things differently. I think is where, but honestly, it's not a conscious thought for me. Like I really think again in this way is like, God is just really how He's worked on my heart in that same way. Is just like intentionally, like I don't come in thinking like, these things aren't going well. And again, I think that's also, attributes of like what you've done already and like how much I trust you with things. But like, yeah, like I don't come in trying to like, do all these other drills and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, like you have them doing those drills for a reason. I might just like see something or have another cue or have something, another, and something that might work for them. And again, it doesn't mean that you haven't told them the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
They might just need to hear it from me and you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then also, again, it's always good to have a fresh voice. It's always good to have,
Sure.
that come in and also, with it as well, it's like, because you're the coach every single day, you can get, the dad syndrome,
Mhm.
right? Where it's like, all right, dad, I know,
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
doing this. I'm
Heard
not
you
doing
say it
this.
for
Right.
3
And then I
weeks,
walk
yeah.
in and the same thing too. And I'm like, hey, like, you're not doing this.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, and then a lot of times I know when I'm saying stuff to them, I can see you over there like,
Yeah.
remember we talked about
Yeah,
that?
for sure.
Remember we've had the conversation? Like, I
Yeah.
know, and so like, I like doing that too, where there's like a reinforcement. There's like a reinforcement for
Mhm.
that,
Yeah, and I think too, I don't care if it's you saying it, me saying it, or Jarrell coming in asking if someone asked that they played hockey. Like my whole goal is I want the kid to be able to hit and have success and learn and grow. And like, when you come in to talk, I listen. Like it's a fresh perspective, it's a fresh voice. And my intentions aren't, I want to be the guy that gets them to hit, like
Yeah.
want them to hit, but it doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
It could be information that I gave to them and then they heard it in a different way from
Yep.
someone else somewhere. And if that helped them hit, like,
Or a different time.
You
And
know.
I think that's the thing is like one, there's a quote of it's amazing what we can accomplish when we don't care who gets the credit. And then second, there's a bigger thing as well. Like biblically, I remember when this happened as well. And again, if you know the Bible, stick with me. If you don't, not biblical, just listen for the information. You know what I'm saying? Take the nuggets. Is that, for example, like when John the Baptist, like when he was at the time, he was baptizing everybody and leading them towards God. And then Jesus came around. And then when Jesus came around, people were coming up to John the Baptist and were like, hey, like Jesus is kind of taking your thunder here, right? Like they're all following him now. You're starting to lose followers because they're all following Jesus. And he's like, wait, like, hold on, you guys got this twisted. Like
Yeah.
the whole point of me doing is to lead them to God. Like it's not about me. It's about leading them to God. And then the same thing in that same way. It's like the whole point is for me to get you to hit. I don't care what gets you to hit. If your coach at your high school coach told you something and you're hitting better, great, dude. We're on the same team, bro.
Yeah.
Like it's not about me getting the credit for you to hitting. Like I'm just here to help you and try to make that time as get you better as quick as possible, right? So I don't care who it comes from. I don't care, who gave you the idea, who gave you the cue. I still cues from people all over the time. Like I still cues from. Sometimes the kid comes up with a cue.
Yeah,
He's like,
100%.
yeah, I've been thinking about left pinky toe and eyebrow. Like great, awesome, like great. And I might steal that and use it with 5 other guys this week. So I think in that same way, but again, like with that, in my opinion, though, if you're struggling with that, like that's a heart condition thing. Right. And I think people run past that. It's like, like you could really want and you could say logically, like, hey, I want them to have this, I want them to get better and I don't want it to be about me. Right. But sadly, we're human beings. And a lot of times too, like we're also humans as well. A lot of times coaches like to make themselves not human. Like you're human too. And also too, if you put a lot of time with guys, unconsciously a lot of time, like you go and like, let's say I've worked with a guy for 4 years, blah, 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 blah. And then, his 5th year, he blows up and whatever. And, some things started clicking for him and X, Y, and Z. And you can start to put some identity in that player. And so I actually asked Lindsay Leftwich the other day from LSU. I asked her, I texted her, I said, because I catch myself doing it sometimes, and it's a row I think God has really healed in me in that way, is that I was like, hey, have you ever put identity in coaching, right? Which I'm asking that like I do and everybody does, but I wanted to get her perspective, and she was like, all the time, like all the time I catch myself putting identity and the performance of my players, us winning, again, like, the success we're having, how people are viewing our program, like all of these things. And like, I have to catch myself and remember, what, is really important here. And again, like that player is, and it's not only those things of just being like, okay, I need to keep the player first, but like, okay, but why in my brain am I not keeping the player first? Why do I keep catching myself doing that? And, or for example, like if I'm not getting credit for things, why does it hurt me? And I think a lot of people try to just push that aside. Like, oh, well, I got to act like it doesn't hurt. No. Those feelings are valid, right?
Feedback.
You have to go back and go to those feedback and understand that there's something that, you're probably, again, we talked about this, yesterday as well, when we're, during Bible study, is we had the conversation of like, okay, like for me, I sometimes can have problems with, weighing human opinions over God's opinion. It happened to me a lot, right? And I fall into that of being like, again, like Michael Todd recently did one where he's like, cuffed to the comments is like one of his things that he had come out with. And one of the things he talked about being like cuffed to comments is like, you're cuffed to what people think about you. It doesn't mean social media, just social media. In general, you're cuffed to what people think about you, and you're cuffed to, their feedback. And you could be doing the absolute perfect thing, right? But society is against the opposite way right now. Or again, like you're just seen in the wrong light. You're they see you as the wrong person. They wanted you to be the stallion. They wanted you to be the conqueror. They wanted you to be 6'5". They wanted you to be, they wanted you to be a big leaguer. They wanted you to, whatever that is, right? And you don't meet what's in their head, right? And often, I think in the same way too, of like, if you're following God, right? If you're following God and who God always picks, right? Like you're David and Goliath, right? Like he's going to pick the one that, again, you had massive, again, the David and Goliath story, right? Like you had massive soldiers. You had guys that have been fighting for years in the wars. You had Saul, right? You had your conquering, righteous, strong leader, right? That envision in your head of what you think it looks like. And then you got, skinny little mini David walking up and he's like, yeah, I'm not afraid. And it's just like, again, it messes with your head. And like, that's what God does is like, he doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Right. And so like in that same way is like, we often can forget. And again, confidence that we need to have is like, if God has asked us to do something and as God has asked us to walk forward in something, again, he is going to fill in the gaps. Like we might not be qualified. We might not have this. We might not have those other things, but we also have to be intentional about, did God call me to do this? Or is this something that I'm putting on my agenda and my other things? But the bigger message there, I think is that I think a lot of times, we can fall into the habit of thinking that God only does great things with people that are already great, rather than, remembering there that again, he is great. Yeah. We're not great. He makes the things we do great. And we look up, and it's weird for me now that I'm in the position that I am now, is that like, I remember being in the other side and other things, and like people think on the same way. It's like, well, of course he's using Joey because Joey's great in this area and he can do this and he has the skill set and he has these other things. And it's like, yeah, but like, that's not how it always looked. Like I was the guy, again, I still get comments, I still get comments. Oh, you didn't play good in high school and college, and you weren't a big leaguer, and you're not speaking from experience, and blah, blah, blah. And, and again, also too, like all you do is teach kickbacks, and, you're lining your hair and you're cutting your eyebrow and you're whatever somebody wants to weaponize on the other side of that. Right. And then like the mixture of all of that, of getting lost in the process of being like, no. And that's why I did that thread a little while back ago and being like, no. It's not that I'm qualified. I don't deserve this. Right. Every day I walk forward in gratitude as a gift that God has given me to be on the platform that I am, and not like, oh yeah, well, good for you, it fell on your lap. Like, no, like in a sense of like, there was a lot of sacrifices, but at the same time, God did 99% of it. Like I did do some big sacrifices, my 1% of sacrifices, in the sense of like, I've given up my life. I turned away from a lot of money. I did a lot of those other things. Like completely turned around my life, did a lot of sacrifices, a lot of hours, hundreds and weeks with 100-hour weeks and things like I did all those things, yes, but at the same time, like, doesn't make me deserving. Like there's a lot of people that work hard, right? And God just chose me in that way because again, I was being obedient to what he called me to do.
Yeah, and I think that goes. Me and Taylor were having a conversation this morning about kind of like let's just say like the growth of me being willing to be on a camera now. And you know how when I first got here and I saw you do it, and I was like, whoa, like that's so crazy. Like he just lights up for a camera. And again, not that I have the same personality as you when I get on a camera, of course, but if you were to say, hey, we need to go shoot something, I wouldn't hesitate. I would go get in front of a camera. But 6 months ago even, I'd have been like, can you do it? Type, that would be the first
Yeah.
thing in my head,
Yep.
and the reasoning behind it all was, what are you listening to?
Yeah.
And what do you choose to hear? And
For
I
sure.
hear you talk about, and you get, because again, obviously you have more of a following on social media than I do. When you post something, more people see it on average. Um, you're going to get comments that aren't good. You're going to get people that disagree. You're going to get good, bad, in between, right? And, as I started getting in front of the camera and then people disagree, it's funny, like we were talking about this a little bit of, okay, well, I had 5 people comment good things, like 2 DMs, and it's like, but then the one person that disagrees with me, it's like pisses me off. I'm like that, and then I choose to hear that, and it's like,
Yeah.
what am I choose? Okay, there's tons of people that not maybe agreed, but liked it, and I
Yeah.
run past that, and I just look at the one comment that someone's
Yeah.
disagreeing, and I'm like,
Yeah.
screw that guy. It's like that's the
Yeah.
first thing that comes to my head. But being able to, not take that offensively, but take it as just feedback, both of them as feedback. And admittedly, too, sometimes I can just turn off all good and bad and just ignore all of it, which then I've realized through conversation with you, Jarrell, Taylor, everybody is like that can also cause my growth to be stagnant because it is feedback, good and bad.
Yeah.
And then I'll just, you can sit in that little, the same spot
Yeah, your
because you're
little
not
bubble.
not taking that feedback and evaluating it without, that initial reaction
Yeah.
from it. And so I think that's been a big part too of when it comes to giving information, receiving information too, of what do you choose to listen. And I think that's really big for players too, with how, again, we post some players and they're high school kids getting ready to go to college or they're college, and they're getting these comments on their like more views than they've ever seen, millions of plays. They're
Yeah.
getting comments and they're having to see it. And it's, they're not necessarily prepared or haven't had that talk, which is a completely different aspect of
Yeah.
our training that
Which is
we've
weird.
had to
We've had
add.
to equip. Yeah. We've had to
Yeah.
equip them of like, hey, like we're gonna put you, on social media. We're gonna put you on social media, and just know that anyone that trains with us, like, you're gonna get comments. You're gonna get people that respond back. You're gonna get those things are going to happen. And with that, like, there's gonna be a lot of negative comments. Be prepared for that. Because also too, I mean, like, let's think about it. Let's just go. If you've ever been a manager or led anything, right? If you've ever led anything, if you ever again have been a parent, all those other things. Again, what do you hear from your kids? Praise reports 90% of the time. What do you hear from your customers? 90% praise reports? No, like you hear the loud voices.
Yeah, it's like the Yelp reviews.
Yeah, you hear the big things,
Yeah.
right? And so because of that, you hear the things that, again, most of the time it's everything going bad. That's when somebody feels like they want to talk. They're not going to come and give you praise. So again, also with that, like let's say you get 5 big comments, like, well, that's actually a big thing because there is 1,000 people that watched it that really liked it. Right. And first off, they might not even like the post. They might have just liked the post and didn't comment. They might have sent it to their friend. Right. And again, there's some of these things that we can measure and all those things. But also at the end of the day, is that a lot of times is, again, the loudest voices you're going to hear are the people that are naysayers. Right. Like that's always going to be the case. So like, really in the last couple of weeks, and for me in that same way that I had realized that I was doing that. And again, like you said, like, where am I giving my attention to? And so one of the things I just started thinking about a lot more too, as well as like, I started weighing more of understanding of being like, okay, all I have to do now is give it over to God. And let him invade those areas and those places of like, okay, hey God, I'm noticing that I'm weighing other people's opinions higher than yours. Right. And I don't want to do that. Right. Like I want yours to be like, and again, I don't know how to fix that. I don't know those other things, but I'm handing it over to you. I know that this is a problem that I'm having, and I'm handing it to you. And I know for me, for example, in the last like couple of weeks is that like, again, I'll post things and like I've been posting things and not looking at comments. It also has helped, personally with like Instagram they redid how they display comments, right? When now if I go look how comments are, like, it's harder for me to go find comments. I have to like go and like and have to try to go look rather than I turn off notifications on my phone. Like I turn off notifications for social media now when it comes to comments unless it's somebody I follow, right? And like other than that, like everybody's commenting. You got 14-year-old Billy telling me I'm an idiot, and then you got Henry from Nebraska that's been coaching for 40 years, and I this young guy is just reinventing the wheel and doesn't know what he's doing. And I'm like, I know, and all those things, right? So like those are all happening, right? But in the meantime, like you see the fruit of labor. And again, with all of those things, it's like, okay, well, what was your intention? I think this is the other big thing. What was your intention? And I think I changed that. It's like, what was my intention of posting in the first place? What's your intention of coaching in the first place? Right? If my intention, and again, I need to pull it up. I need to memorize the verse directly, but I know another biblical line was like, again, like, if it says like, if you're in search of man's approval, like God will give you just that and nothing else. And what that verse means to me is that if you're searching for man's approval, he'll give you man's approval, right? But you're not going to get God's approval, which is really what you're really in search of. And you're going to keep coming up again, like thirsty again. You're going to keep coming up dehydrated, right? Because again, that word is not fulfilling, right? That's not a good way of going about things. I'm doing this for man's praise. I'm doing this for people to comment and tell me I'm the smartest. I'm doing it because now I've set that expectation. And when I don't get that, when everybody doesn't respond that way, when everybody doesn't tell me that I'm the smartest guy in the room, and everybody doesn't tell me that that's the most brilliant drill that anybody's ever thought of, Joey, again, that's obviously going to leave me in a very bad place rather than if I go into it saying like, hey, I'm posting this because one person might find value in this, and I'm just trying to help that one person. Well, now, again, I'm going to get one response that's, again, even if they like it or if they watch it or they do whatever, like I'm posting it already knowing the moment I post it, I've already gotten back what I did from that. And again, truer intention for me, it being like, okay, well, like I'm just helping people and giving out information. Like it's free, man. Social media is free.
Yeah.
Like you consume it, take the meat, leave the bones, move on.
Yeah, I think something with social media too, as I've started trying to post more and getting a little bit more active, is asking more questions to almost to see where other people's eyes are at too. What are people, and it can be this way where there's kind of like these trends, even when it comes to training. Like now everyone wants to talk about how are you using the ground, but 5 years ago I never heard a coach ever tell me anything about using the ground. Like it never even popped up once. It was all bat speed. That's the only thing I ever heard in college. And then, now I hear coaches all talk about how are you using the ground. Not all, but you hear it a lot more, right? And so it's interesting to me, like, to get perspective of where coaches and players' eyes and minds are at. So then too, it can help me understand how to communicate better, in a way. And I guess that's just like it's like an indirect tactic that I've built over time of, trying to get people's perspective so I can try to communicate. I can try to talk the way that to that player in my language, but that may not resonate. So if I can ask them and then give them to give me feedback of, okay, this is how I feel, this is what I'm seeing, all that type of stuff, maybe I can gain a better perspective of where their head's at and where their eyes are at. And ideally that can help me relay the information that I have in a way that they can interpret.
Yeah. No, I think it's big. Yeah. And I think that's the thing is like, again, when you in your heart want to help somebody, you're going to go about things differently. When you truthfully, like someone can be like, oh, and I did this, guilty. Like, oh, I'm just here to help. I had other intentions, right? Like I had other intentions, not consciously, just unconscious. Like there was other things that I was in search of, right? And then as I got, I healed a lot more in a lot of different areas as I started maturing. And a lot of people, I think, just label it maturity back in the day. Oh, as you start to mature. Yeah, but also too is like God is healed in certain ways. I'm like, oh, okay, like, again, like I truthfully do just I want to help, right? Like, okay, I want to help. And again, that's not a check mark for me. It's not in every situation. Like I constantly have to weed my garden, I call it. Like I constantly have to weed out these other things that might be in there and intentions, and people hurt you and they let you down and they didn't do this. And well, like those things are always happening. And so it's like you constantly got to weed your garden and making sure resentments aren't building up or, again, like again, it could be when you're younger, oh, your dad never believed in you and all these other
Yeah.
things. And like, okay, great. Like, and then you had this big weed that you had to, okay, you did all that, right? And now you healed from that. Well, then you went to work and your boss told you that you would never be a manager or, again, I remember when I was younger, when a coach told me, it was a big driver for me for a long time. A coach told me that I would never be a Division I athlete.
Mm.
Like, and I'm like, okay, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? When I became Division I didn't even know who that coach was anymore. I don't even remember his name. I
Yeah.
remember how he made me feel.
Yeah.
I don't even remember his name. I don't even know, like, I played with his son, right? Like, and again, like with that, like, do I think when I made Division and I went back to him and I was like, hey, I see I'm a Division athlete, he'd been like, Joe, I don't even remember having that conversation with you. And also too, I'm sure he didn't like mean it like that. I was probably being a little prick and he was probably, responding back to me being like, well, I was probably like, I'm going to be a Division athlete and and whatever. And maybe I was being arrogant and he was trying to coach me. Like he probably had good intentions, right? Like it's all good. But again, like with that, like when I accept those things into my heart, when I accept that stuff in, like, a lot of times I can get it mixed up. And I think again, you have to weed your garden every single day to make sure that your intentions stay straight.
Yeah.
Everything,
Yeah, I think that's big too. Is I obviously know your heart and your intentions, and you know mine. And so when we look at, maybe some of the stuff that we give players or the advice that we give, whether you agree with it or not, or that's exactly how you would do it or word it, where my heart's at with it too. But with that too, I kind of wanted to talk about this because I've had some players that have go into college and get into college and they're younger. They don't feel like they have a voice to talk about it of, okay, maybe they don't agree with the drills or the prep work or exactly what we're having them do. Whether it's lack of understanding, whatever the reasoning is. But the kid themselves feels more confident. They're seeing some results. And this can happen all the way up to the pro level, as you probably know. And you've obviously worked with way more athletes that have gone off to college, gone to high school. So I'm curious to see those conversations that you have when it comes to, okay, this is what we're doing. It's been helping. It's been working. But then you get into a situation, maybe a particular one I'm thinking about. This kid goes to a summer ball league, and he's down there playing, and we remote program for him. And he basically just reaches out and is like, hey, when I'm in the cage, it's like the coaches are around, I can't do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like they won't let me do some of this stuff. So, we had that conversation and to the best of my ability, I navigated through it. And, he's seen some success recently and, and so it's been cool to see and see the fruits of that. But I'm curious your thoughts, when you have some, whether you want to call them old school or don't agree, coaches that don't necessarily see things the way that you're seeing them or I'm seeing them or us as a whole see them. Kind of give me your perspective on some of those conversations that you've had over time with players when they get in those situations and how to help them navigate through those.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think a big thing for me with that is a lot of times, first off, I like to edify the coach that they already have, right? Like I'm like, hey, like that coach that you have is trying to help you, right? He's not making you do drills because he doesn't think they're going to work. Like they're going to work. They've worked for somebody at least, right? That's why he uses them, right? If he doesn't, same thing with me. I wouldn't use drills if I didn't think that they worked, right? Okay, so that's one. Understand his intentions. Two, along with that as well, as being like, also what you understanding is like, okay, that might lead to your performance or whatever that might be, but at the end of the day, like, this is not your team. Like this is not your team. Like he has a way he wants to develop hitters. He wants to do X, Y, and Z. Like when you're during your team time, like you need to do your team stuff. Now, if he tells you, hey, 3 rounds of 5 free swings, you can do whatever you want. Well, then that's different.
Yeah.
Right. But like, if not, like, like again, I used to get to practice every day, 45 minutes early. Right. And I would go hit in the cage and I would do all my stuff. Like, and also too, like someone might come up and be like, what are you doing? Or whatever that is. Like, okay, right. Fine. But like at the end of the day, like I think along with it is like, okay, understand, like you still need to do your team stuff. If he wants to do 3 rounds of backside ground balls to second base, you need to do that.
Yeah.
Like that's his team,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're on his team. He's giving you a spot on his team. You need to do what he asks you to do. Right now, again, it doesn't mean that you can't have communication with him. It doesn't mean that you can't go sit down with him and say, "Hey, this is why I'm doing these things." It doesn't mean that you should just do whatever your coach says, no matter what, without any context. Or there should never be a conversation. And again, I think that's not a healthy relationship to not be able to communicate.
For sure.
But also, with that being said, as well, is like understanding like it is his team and it also is your career. You don't need to play there either, right? You have
Yeah.
a decision in that as well, right? Like you could transfer, like you got transfer portal now, you have all those other things. Again, whole nother subject. Probably just triggered somebody. Okay, like you could leave. You do have that decision, right? Just like a coach has a decision where he doesn't need to coach at that school.
Yeah.
He can coach somewhere else, right? And he can always leave, right? And if the AD wants to go this way, like they can talk about it, all those other things. But like, there's things every single day as a coach that you have to do that the AD is telling you to do, and how you're running your practices, or how you would like to run things, or how you would like to spend money, or how you would like to X, Y, and Z. And like you're gonna have to deal with that then. So again, it's about having those adult conversations with it, and two, it's just like learning how to navigate. Like, there's a lot of conversations like I have with guys as well, being like, you also need to know how to stroke some egos, right? And sometimes with that as well, it's like you need to know how to build relationships with certain guys. And again, it's not always just like, I'll tell him what he wants to hear, but also too, sometimes I do need to tell someone what they want to hear. In the sense of the same thing too, is just being like, hey, like, again, like that might be my way of like loving on them or whatever. I mean, I know, for example, like there'll be times where my coach have been harping on me about something and like he just needs a dub. Like in his wherever he is, right where he is as a coach, like he needs a dub. And so like, I'd hit a double doing my thing, right? Get to second base, do my little dance, whole whatever. Then you get back home and you come in the dugout. You come back in the dugout and you come back over to the coach and you're like, you that squish the bug thing,
Yeah.
money, bro. That was so thanks, coach.
Yeah.
Really helped, right? And like stroking the ego a little bit, like in that same way. And it's like, again, like some people might agree with it, some people might not. I think in a lot of ways, like when you're throughout life, like if it's with your boss or whatever these other things, like I'm not saying like there's a point where I think you cross some lines of like whatever that looks like. But I also think on the same way is like when you're playing the game. You're playing the game and you're really trying to get to your end result, which is like, hey, I want to perform, and I know if I perform, everybody will be happy. Hitting coaches can be happy when I'm hitting, and also too, like, the coach is trying to his best of his ability. Like you chose to go get a private coach, and like because of that, like you're probably going to take some heat. You're probably going to be doing some things, and also too, what do you want him to do? Teach you a drill, or just have you doing random drills that he doesn't understand, and he can't help coach you, and he has no idea what you're trying to get out of it. And it's not even like old school new school. Like there's a lot of new school guys that would disagree with a lot of stuff that we do.
Yeah.
Like it's okay, we just train differently, right? Like, and so because of that, like I understand that you're not going to agree. I understand you're not going to have context. I understand all those other things, and also every situation is different. You're going to have to navigate through. So this is really like broad advice, but like, I think the big piece there is just like, no matter what, like you need to remain respectful. Like you need to, understand that they're giving you an opportunity, and like anything extra that you need to do, like you need to do it on your time, not theirs.
Yeah, I think the big topic too, and even with hitters here, just kind of like final thoughts on that is just communication as a whole. I think a lot of players, me included, guilty, took me until, fifth year until I was really comfortable communicating. Like you were saying, like what were my intentions behind the communication? Was it to actually gain a better understanding of why they were having me do what I was doing? Or was I just pissy and trying to make my point and, trying to get it off my chest and show them, that, what I was saying was right, and then when I actually went into a conversation with the intentions of, okay, what's your why behind what we're doing? What's my why behind what I thought I was doing or should be doing? And admittedly too, it's not always, your favorite conversation to have, it's like what you need to hear, not what you want to hear sometimes when you have those conversations. But the communication too is super big when it comes to that relationship that you have and trust that you have with the coach, and then also to just here in house with the private side of the communication of, okay, this is what I was feeling when I played. That helps give me context of where they're at and where they're at, like their headspace, what their moves are like, XYZ, you know, and so it definitely gives me context and gives me a direction at times when, you know, maybe they went and played 8 games, you know, and they didn't get video because, you know, their parents didn't go or whatever, you know, whatever the reason. A lot of times, again, those kids are the ones that we see a lot of good results with as they come in and they communicate, or after their round, they come over and ask some questions, or they pull up video from the iPad and ask questions, and we have those conversations, you know,
Yeah.
or, you know, after the session, you have those conversations with them when you see a couple things. And so I think the big point I took from that was just communication as a whole.
Yeah.
I think a lot of college kids in particular.
People are just really scared of like confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
And like confrontation doesn't always mean like again, and I think it's also because they've had bad experiences. So like they've had like every time they've communicated, like maybe they grew up with a parent that every time they brought something up where they disagreed, like they were hit with a hammer. Like, you know, like not physically, hopefully.
Yeah.
But like hit with a hammer, right? We're coming down like, you know, why would you ever ask that? And it turned into like a fight rather than being able to have healthy communication. And also too, not every time you communicate with somebody is it going to be healthy, right? And you're going to learn, you know, throughout that process. And but I think also with that, like these are life skills. That's why I always talk about with like players, like, hey, these are life skills. Like you're gonna be in disagreements with people every day of your life, right? And you need to know how to navigate those conversations. And if like every time you get in a disagreement with somebody, you just kick them out of your life, or you transfer, or you do whatever, right? And you're like, screw that, I'm going to the transfer portal because he's making me do these drills. And it's like, have you had a conversation with the coach? Have you sat down in his office with him one-on-one? Like, I get it. Like, maybe you said it in front of the whole team. Like, have you sat down with him and, you know, sat with him and there? Okay. And also too, is there another player on the team that feels the same way? Can both of you go sit in the office and say, hey, like, or again, can you talk to your team captain? And then like, you know, you guys both go in there and have conversations that way, or maybe he communicates it for you. You know, again, like, is a healthier way to do it is like, is it an email? Is it a text message? Is it a, you know, like, hey, let's go get lunch. You know, what is, you know, like there's a lot of different ways you can go about communicating, and depending on what the person, you know, what your coach's, you know, leadership style is and what that looks like. And also at the end of the day, like you can't expect results. Like just because you try to go talk to somebody doesn't mean that it's going to turn out, you know, well. But again, like you can at least go and learn from that. And like, instead of, it's definitely not healthy that every time something happens, you just you immediately cut off your communication and just go, okay, well, I'm just going to leave then. Like that's not a healthy relationship in any right, inside of baseball, outside of baseball, and any type of confrontation. You got to know how to actually have communication and be able to, you know, to try to come to some type of agreement. Because a lot of times you're frustrated because you just lack perspective. Like you just lack perspective. So you're frustrated because you don't understand something. And so that coach is probably going to give you a different perspective than you actually can see, and he can see a bigger picture of how he's trying to get you in the lineup in one way, and you're trying to be a power guy. And he's like, yo, like if you try to do this right now, like again, like you're striking out too much, you're popping up too much, all these other things, and that's not going to get you in the lineup. And in this lineup, I need you to do this, and I want you to be in my lineup. That's why I'm coaching you this way, right? And that's some context I might need to have. And also too, if you're not okay with that, and you don't want to be in the lineup in that way, either one, you might have to sit the bench until you're good enough to do what you want to do, or two, you might need a transfer, or three, you might need to wait a couple years until the lineup changes, or you know, whatever those things are.
Dynamic.
Or on the other side of that, having communication with them and saying like, hey, well, that's not the role that I would like to play on this team. This is how I think I would contribute the best in the long run. I think right now that might serve the team in the short run. And also too, maybe you guys come up with a plan. It's like, hey, like, okay, we're going to go this route. Like, I'm going to trust you to run this route, the X, Y, and Z. But you know, that might change at a later time, and like, let's check back here in 2 months or whatever. And let's see how it goes. Like, there's a lot of things with there's a lot of things rather than just like, you know, leaving. Right. And a lot of people try to do that. Right. It's like and that happens again. If I'm stepping on your toes, is, you know, again, it might be the same thing in your life, right? Like you might just want to leave. I'm the opposite. Like I'll stand my ground and fight with you. Right. Like we'll stay here all day arguing. Yeah. Again, I'm stubborn. Like I'm like, no, I'm going to win. Right. So like, I get it. Like I fall into that trap where I'm like, I want to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Which is why we're on a podcast. Like, okay, like we can talk. Right. But a lot of people want to do the opposite, where they don't want to talk and they just want to escape and go somewhere else.
For sure. No, I think that was good stuff. I think that's about all I had to cover.
That's good. Yeah. So yeah, no, I mean, we're going to constantly we're going to try to get back into doing the podcast more often. Again, with it, you got a lot of things moving, but we're coming up with some things logistically. Excited for Nicole to get here as well.
Yeah.
You guys didn't know, and you're listening to this podcast. Actually, by the time this comes out, Nicole should probably already
Yeah.
be here and be rocking.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicole, the assistant over at Texas softball, is now coming on board, and she's going to lead the whole softball side of her thing. Is super excited for her to come. I think she's gonna she has a tremendous amount of potential and skill set she already currently has.
Mm-hmm.
That will be big for us, and also too, I think we'll be able to help a lot of athletes. So excited for her to come on board, and I'm sure we'll have her on the podcast here soon.
Yeah. So let me get the outro.
Oh, you got to
Let me get the outro.
Go ahead.
Till next time, Farm System out.